Well, for a little bit more on this, we're now joined via Zoom by Professor of Political Science at the University of South Africa, Professor Dirk Kotze. Prof, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
All right. You know, we say this every time, but I do get a sense that there's something different about this elective conference and this race going into it. And I wonder if that is a fair assessment, because in the past they denied there was disunity. They soldiered on, but here we're hearing for the first time the house is on fire. Confessions and admissions ahead of this conference. What does that tell us about the dynamic of this conference coming up?
Well, I think it's very much open now, except for the position of President. As your introduction indicated, that there seems to be a lot of support for President Ramaphosa, and he's in a relatively strong position. But when we look, for example, at the position of the Deputy President, and we know that in the past the Deputy President was a key position because it identified to a large extent the successor of the President. That is completely open. There is at this stage no indication of any sort of number two person who who's in a strong position, who are sort of the favorite for this. At the same time, I think what they are trying to do is to move away from the so-called slates. That means that there are two sets of candidates from each side, from the pro-Ramaphosa side and then pro-Zuma or pro-RET, whatever you want to call that, and that you have two sets of candidates. And I think what we are seeing now is that is indeed at this stage not very clear whether there is indeed these two sets of candidates. And it's going to go to a large extent first to the branches, but ultimately to the provinces, because in the end there must be only one nomination per province. So it means that in total there can be nine nominations for that of president, for deputy president, and so on. But even then, it will have to be reduced to a total, a maximum of 3 per the 6 positions. So it is a new dynamics in terms of the nomination process, which did not always exist in the past. But as I'm indicating, I think at this stage, many of the ANC's branches haven't made up their mind exactly who they are going to support and in which position.
All right, I'll get to that question just now, why they haven't made up their mind. But I'm curious as to why the deputy president position would be so open. What's the story about Deputy President Mabuza?
Well, I think if we go back to 2017 when he was elected, he was not the first choice. The candidate on the Ramaphosa side was indeed Lindiwe Sisulu. But because of the dynamics and the fact that the contest was so closely run and that President Ramaphosa was in need of at least 200 or more votes, which then came from Mpumalanga and from David Mabuza as the provincial leader, that gave him the option in order to fill that position. So it was a move right at the last moment. It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of the Ramaphosa campaign that he should be the person in that position. At the same time, I think we have to remind ourselves that at that stage there was the Premier League configuration, and that Mpumalanga was actually part of that, together with the Free State and the Northwest. So in a sense, it was actually breaking the coherence of the Dlamini Zuma campaign. And I think in that process, it served it very well for President Ramaphosa to have a person that actually came from the opposite side in order to join him. So it was very much a pragmatic approach, and not so much that he was indeed very much part of the Ramaphosa team. But in the meantime, he lost that leverage. Mpumalanga is not going to play that role again at the national conference. So what he could bring to the table, he lost in the meantime, in terms of negotiating power. And therefore he is, as it seems at the moment, not really in the running at all for the position of as Deputy President. I think what is in the back of the minds of the ANC also is the 2024 election. And that is that even if they elect now a new leadership, it doesn't mean necessarily that they are going to become the government leaders in the position of President and Deputy President and ministers necessarily. So that has opened up the political playing field tremendously. And I think this is something that the ANC also must calculate about what will be the best team for them going into the election if they have to start to cooperate with other parties in some form of coalition, for example.
If Mpumalanga was the kingmaker in the last conference, who do you see as holding that title this time around?
It will be a combination of the Eastern Cape and Gauteng. They are, together with KwaZulu-Natal, the biggest provinces, and they have the sort of the balance of power within the ANC and at the national conference. It looks like KwaZulu-Natal will move to a large extent behind the candidate who will ultimately emerge as sort of representative of the Zuma constituency. And we don't know yet whether it is Zweli Mkhize or it will be someone else. But it looks like there has been a consolidation within KwaZulu-Natal around President Zuma. We've seen it lately after the Provincial conference, the changes that were made there, the fact that this new leadership has gone back to President Zuma also to ask for what they call his guidance or his political advice. So he is in a relatively strong position, but only in KwaZulu-Natal, not in the rest of the country. So I think KwaZulu-Natal will not necessarily be being part of the team that might emerge around President Ramaphosa. And they will not play that role definitely in support of President Ramaphosa.
What's your assessment of the Free State? Because that was another Premier League province in its day, and a lot of things have happened since then.
Well, I think the fact that Isma Kasule has effectively been removed from the political landscape in general, especially for this conference, the fact that the provincial executive of the Free State was disbanded by court judgment, and that the interim provincial team was established there, which was, by implication, it ultimately favored the Ramaphosa supporters. And I think what we've seen is that they actually developed a coherence and a strong foothold in the Free State. So at this stage, it is, ironically, it is now a province that is leaning very much towards President Ramaphosa. Compared to 5 years ago, when it was really one of the strongholds of the Zuma group and Dr. Dlamini Zuma.
When the branches have their meetings and they're discussing, what do you think will be the conversation? Will it be 2024, or will it be we need to show loyalty to our representative in our province, our faction, etc., etc.? What is going to override? The party is at a critical juncture. They know that they have a lot at stake. Could sanity prevail and say we need to have better conversations?
Well, that, ideally speaking, for the ANC is what should happen, but I'm not sure whether it is going to happen. I think at the branch level, there's a lot of looking at what is the local conditions, what is the local situation of the ANC in that particular area. They have a good idea since last year's local government election where they stand, but they will, I guess they will try to see that there's a leadership, first of all, in the National Executive Committee, that there are some people close to them from their own province or their own region who will ultimately be elected into the National Executive Committee, plus then ultimately that of the top six. I'm not sure whether they have the bigger picture in mind about the ANC at the national level or the national situation of the ANC, if that is what they're going to keep in mind. I think they will more look at at least the regional context within the province, and then secondly, the provincial situation. And to what extent that can ultimately put them in a position where they, as a branch and specific members, leading persons within the branch, can have the opportunity ultimately to get into higher positions at the regional level in the province and ultimately at the provincial level. Because that has become the dynamics of ANC politics. It's not so much about policy matters necessarily, and I don't think there will be before the national conference in December again any significant discussions about policy issues at branch level, although they are supposed to do it because the report of the policy conference is supposed to come back to them and for them to formulate their final positions before they go to the national conference. But I don't think that's going to receive a lot of attention. It is rather, who do they have to support as local candidates in order to gain access to positions at regional and provincial level for them?
All right. So perhaps in closing, what kind of, I don't know, I'm not going to say campaigning because it's probably not going to look like that, but it will happen between the nomination process starting to the conference itself. We're already seeing warnings that saying to leaders, do not come to our provinces to try and influence our branch meetings in any way. So it does seem that there's going to be some kind of activity. What do you see in the next few months?
Well, it's actually only a month that they will have, because by the middle of November, the branches must have completed their nominations, and also at the provincial level, it must have been completed. So there's relatively little time left. It's around about the 12th of November, where they must have completed all of this. What we will most possibly see is that persons going for especially the top 6 positions will move around in the country in order to meet branches, to try to talk with them. There is a sentiment, it seems to me, of saying to them, don't come to us to lecture us and to present you as a candidate to us. Rather talk about the politics of the ANC and how we collectively can improve, and talk about this notion of renewal and unity within the ANC. There has always been a resistance against persons purely coming and campaigning for themselves. Think about Tokyo Segwale about 10 years ago, who really failed because he was openly campaigning for himself. So there is a tradition in the ANC against that. But still, at the same time, there will be, I think, a sort of countrywide tours by some of these prominent possible candidates in order to present themselves, to register a presence there, in order to influence the way in which the nomination processes are going to come to a conclusion in the provinces.
Professor Dirk Kotze, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us this evening. And no doubt we'll have quite a few conversations over the next few weeks. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you. Good evening.